Aloha, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Our Undoing Radio. We are continuing our merry journey into the sacred with my friend Tiokasin Ghosthorse. Tiokasin is the host of First Voices Radio. He is a musician of renown and a speaker, a global speaker. So you are the perfect person to ask for the Lakota perspective on the sacred. So let me just set it up this way. We hear that life is sacred. We hear that all things are sacred. And then we also hear that certain texts are sacred. We hear that certain objects are sacred. Certain sites in the world are sacred, and go on and on. What is the Lakota sense of the sacred? Is it specific to objects and locations and things of that nature, or is it everything? Is it internal? Is it external? What does the sacred mean?
Well, let's see here. Excuse me. Yeah, I thought you said I'm a speed reader. That's what you said, and that's what I heard anyway.
Oh no, a speaker, a speaker.
No. Okay. All right. Excuse me. So yeah, I can speed read if you need me to, but so. Okay, yeah, that's a big question. I think it's in the imperfection to begin with, and I'm going to try to come to the mind from someplace that's not really centered in the mind, but centered of a different place. But yeah, I think it's in the imperfection. That's where sacred lies, is in the imperfection, because in this world that we hold standards up to, which is the Euroforming West, is that we tend to want to put things from outside back into that lonely box of the Euroforming concepts. So I think if you think about it this way, is that we're not looking for perfection in the Lakota way. I say that because I don't have a word for perfect in Lakota. It's in our designs. It's in everything to remind us how imperfect we are. So I always wonder, well, what if we make everything, the whole design, the way it's supposed to be? But it's really very intelligent of these folks to put in a bead design, one bead that you don't even understand, or you don't see right away unless you have to look for it intensely, that there's one bead out of whack, but it's done so well that people think it's a perfect design. And we know as Lakota people that things are not that way. So if I was to say sacred is perfect, then I'd say that would be really boring, but that's the way I would think about it conceptually, and try to have a tongue-in-cheek reaction back to your question. So the other way to really understand what a sacredness, or, all the definitions that come out in the way we're supposed to be defining or redefining what the word sacred means in English, or any of those words that have to have a concept of holy, or, something that doesn't understand it. But even the holy, we'd have to go back to the Latin. Even the word sacred, we'd have to go back to the Latin. Everything is descending from that language. So we are having to find, extract from another meaning in order to put it into, at least look at and think it's a relationship to the word that we are saying is sacred in English. So yes, we could say its relation to the objects, or even places, or even what's happening is a sacred thing. But these often have to go, again, we have to entirely take whatever that sacred is and put it back into the modern form, according to the Bible, according to whatever religion it's coming from. And because everybody else is doing it, then we should too, so that everybody can understand it.
Well, see, that's an interesting point that gets missed. I mean, essentially, you're saying even asking the question, what is the sacred, means that I, as the questioner, am trying to bounce it off my own language. I'm trying to fit whatever you're going to tell me, or I guess I'm supposing that whatever you tell me is going to fit into the English language. Mm-hmm. And it may not be possible that it can. So that's an interesting thing to start with, right? So do you think that is there, I don't know, an inherent racism or implied racism in a white person asking an Indian, what is the sacred? Because it just means that you're going to tell, I just assume you're going to tell me something that I can relate to.
That's it. Yeah, because you have a lot of native people saying the things that just to get along. And so no one's really getting what that means. In fact, when you're in the confusion is what I would say is the sacred, because you can't nail sacred down. Like people say, well, we have to defend the sacred when actually sacred doesn't need defending. You see, if anything, sacred needs to defend itself from us trying to defend it. So, because sacred can never be defended or even defined. So, what's the use of talking about sacred? Is just a recognition that there is something that we can never define, because it's not teachable knowledge and information or fact or events or whatever. It's not teachable. And that's frustrating to people who try to own thoughts of others. So that's sort of a colonialism and domination, like, define sacredness for me, or what sacred means for me, so that I understand, because I deserve it, because we're speaking about our language, because your language is not good enough. So therefore it's a diminishing of other people's idea or actually enactment of what sacred is. Living it seems to be more close to the word, because if I was to really live as a Lakota, it would confound the people who educated me, who in the West, in the Euroforming thought process, is that they educated me, they taught me how to speak English, read books, work on the computer, all the things that says that I'm civilized, and therefore I am no longer uncontrollable. So I'm really channeling or corralling into one way road or pen into saying, well, here's what I think it is, and therefore what is sacred is completely what you say it is. It's wholly having to do with throwing smoke and mirrors around and chanting the right song and the right music, and that's sacred. And we're supposed to feel something at the moment it's being done and then come away as if we changed something. But that is not the same as it is if I was, as a Lakota, to go outside and completely not have smoke or feathers or a Bible or any kind of symbology, going out into the woods and just sitting there, just being with that which can never be defined as sacred. Talking about what's the word? Apocryphon is something that you can never teach, that you can, it's knowledge that cannot be taught. And sacredness in that sense of understanding is an experience. So you're experiencing all these other energies that we have deemed into nouns as trees and animals and the river and nature and all these things. So, because we can understand it that way. But if we were to go out and just be with that experience, and you can experiment with it, but you can always remember the experience of a certain time you went out into the nature and feel the action of what nature has done with your experiences. It has actually nurtured you. So it's nurturing. So nurturing as it's moving along is the ceremony that people would say is experience. So the ceremony is always a continuum, because once you have ceremony, which I know you're forming people do not have ceremony, because I travel a lot and they tell me at least, that we forgot ceremony. We know what ritual is, but we have ceremony. And I say, well, ceremony is what changes things, right? And what you're doing is ritual, is being changed by the things. It's situation. So there's laws and regulations that say you can only, perform certain things according to a higher up or higher conscience, the Vatican or whatever authority is in charge there. So when we have ceremony, there's no one in charge. It's all in relationship. So if anything, if that you could put that back into the box of sacred for those convenient listeners who want something, who want the answer of what sacred is, then to us, it's always going to be a secret. And that secret can never be unfolded or told. And we can't even say it's mystery because these words are too easy in the flow of it. And the sacred or secret or the mystery can never be defined. And so if I was to say that is Manitou, where humans never live, can't live, and won't be able to survive, that's where wouldn't the sacred or the secret want to be, is no interference with the human who is trying to always define what secret or sacredness is. So the spirits that live there, the energies that live there are always changing. And so how can we describe what sacred is? Because we have come up with a ritual that so much that we've gone away from religion. Lighting a candle is a ritual. It's not ceremony, because that's how humans do it in this sense. But, when to me, it would be if a volcano went off, if a volcano exploded and, erupted, that would be sacred to me. But yet it's how humans hold that as a catastrophe. And how could I think that way? Because it's killing all life and it's killing humans in things. But if you really look at the power that we can never control, well, in a sense, that would be what I would say is sacred.
It seems that in our culture, we want to, in the Western cultures, we want to know what the sacred is so that we can, either honor it or even in honoring it is to get something out of it, right? So is there a correct way that we can approach this in our language, in our way of being, where knowledge does have a place, even if we're using it wrong, where repetition does have a place, even if we're repeating for the wrong reasons? How do we do it for the right reasons in our own culture, or is that not possible?
Well, most people would think I'm anti-Western or anti-whatever, but what I'm saying is it really knowledge if you're using it wrong? Is it really, do we have to rely on that wrong knowledge? And is it information, and if it's wrong, why are we doing it in the first place? It's like I could say, well, this world, this society is extracting from nature and it's using nature, it's not giving back. We know that that's obvious to us. But then we start recycling. And we can say, well, coming from the Western world, the Euroforming world, the least word recycling. Yeah, but the source of why we need to recycle by making more plastic bottles and things, I think it's the idea that we think we can recycle the earth, you see. And I think that is an anomaly and doesn't belong. It's an errant thinking process that will, in a sense, make enough mistakes on itself that it will just not make any sense. And that domination thinking will wipe itself off the earth. So, because that's what nature does. That's what she does. She takes out the dominant species. Because she's, herself looking at what is sacred. And if something is not working with all the other relations, that's not sacred. But if something is working with all the other relations, I would say that that's what is sacred, if we want to put it in more of a definition and an emotion of it. So this other one is looking for existence and, fighting to say, well, you got to include us too, because you're wrong in excluding us, your Westerners, from, defining what sacred is. And so it's coming from that demanding to be included. But when you think about Earth, well, did you ask Earth? Are you demanding Earth to include you because you think this way? Or is the ultimate decider Mother Earth to say, well, I'm not going to have you demand from me because, that's not how to get along with the relationship with all the other species. So, in a way, when we talk about the ideas of how to exist within our languages of denial by intellectualizing or rationalizing why we too, because we're after all human beings to the earth, and our ways have been existing for thousands of years, and that way of capitalism and socialism and all those other democracy tainted ideas about how to live with Earth. Well, you cannot. It's like saying Mother Earth has an app for us, so conveniently we have to, press that and we'll be okay. When she's not even an app, she's not a government, she's not any of those things that we would apply to her. And by just leaving it alone and not trying to define what Mother Earth is, we can understand her telling us what sacred is.
It's funny.
It has nothing to do with the death. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I hear so many people, muse over, are we a video game? Is all of this a video game? And I feel like that sentiment comes from us because we live virtually, just like you're saying. It's like you're either interconnecting with Mother Earth, you're either living, interconnecting with nature, or you're living in imagination, and the imagination is going to be your own selfish thought bubble. And so for some reason, some of us have split off and decided that we're separate beings and we're going to live and we're going to really worship whatever comes out of us. That is more important than our own interconnecting nature. And in fact, the interconnecting nature is to be looked down upon. And I couple that with, in politics, of course, we hear that that oppressed peoples in America, especially black people, from the right, you hear this thing about that they should just get over it. Just get over slavery. Just get over it. That was then, this is now, that sort of thing. And then the liberal version is, well, but if you look around, you see how that is still affecting people. It's still embedded in us as a society, and so on and so forth. But neither ever talk about how entitlement is embedded in white society. Neither of them talk about, like, with that same level of how it has seeped into every facet of our being, to where even the people who are the do-gooders have it. And even the people who are the scientists and the most altruistic of us who are trying to, go on into the future and all this, have it. And you see it come out in things like the 30-meter telescope debacle here in Hawaii, where that arrogance comes out of, but we want to put a telescope there, so that should trump your cultural value. It's okay to do cultural genocide because we're going to have a telescope, right, everybody? So maybe, I mean, what I'm trying to do, I guess, with this season of this show is sort of look at this one word, at least, to show these other perspectives, so that when white society says, well, we have a sense of the sacred too, and our sense of the sacred says, as I've seen multiple people say, that telescope on that mountain would be the perfect crowning jewel for that mountain. That mountain would love it. That would be a sacred moment for that mountain. I see this online. I see people writing such drivel. And I think if you knew the senses of the word sacred from other perspectives, then you would know just how shallow and meaningless that is. Do you think that has any value? Do you think what I'm actually trying to do here has any value?
I think there's not one thing that doesn't have value, because it keeps somebody like me on the truer perspective of understanding where I come from, because there's something that I could say that Jeremy is wrong, but in Lakota I can't say Jeremy is wrong. I can only say the way Jeremy thinks may not be right for me, because that's speaking of my road of experience and the people that I know who aren't tainted by the other thoughts of Euro-Western, because that's the default of what we think about God, the default of why we must speak, the default of everything, why we must have logic and reason the way the Western people do it. So much so that you even feel it extracting you while you're speaking and demanding, you're being demanded to conform to a certain way of thinking. And if we don't, I think you understand that mind stream of, if we don't, as Native people, think or speak the language that everybody speaks in the world now, then we are going to be on the extinction list. Again, I'll go on the other reverse part of it. The other side of it is that the extinction list includes those who dominate. That is no longer feasible, because there's too many people wanting their piece, their way of living or surviving. There's too many humans doing that from that perspective of domination. And so when I'm thinking about how profane that would be for me to introduce this among the elders and say, well, you elders are wrong here, because we don't believe in good and evil, but these people do, and they have this great definition of what sacred is, and they have religion, and they have, all these things, and they can prove it by their gadgets that they can put up on mountains, and we can see other worlds. And I'll say, well, we should live this way now, because our way is dead. We can't be going back to stones and sticks and teepees and horses, and we need running water, we need electricity, we need computers, we need all those things, because that's the way it is now. And even that, thinking those things of when I was talking about the elders, is like, it's not, they're not sitting in judgment of why I'm doing this. They're seeing why they cannot, or they don't want to have the running water or the modern day way of thinking, because what has gotten us this far is to continue to think with the earth, to know that those other beings that we call aliens and those thought processes actually come back to us through nature, through the plants, that necessarily don't have to be humanoid, because that's just, some other people thinking that, intelligence says that you have to come as humanoid form, and we know better, and that those aliens, so-called visitors from other place, it's very intelligent in the sense that they could come back through us to anything, including plants, which are the keepers of that sacred knowledge, that secret knowledge. But when the Western people get involved with dissecting, well, give me some of that plant too, so I can know too, it's not the same, because there's no ceremony about it. They often put science before everything, and the saying, trust in science, right? That's like the biggest lie there is, because it takes you, it deroots you, it takes you away from your roots. Now, if you put, and I think you've heard me say ceremony first before science, before trusting in science, because ceremony is the one where you'll find a proper balance about how to use certain energies. And that's what plants have. They have a ceremony with you before you even eat it. So, if we complete our thoughts and say, well, I'm going to bless food in the Western way, and I would say, no, you can't bless food. That food blesses you. Environmentalists and farmers say, well, we grow food. And I'll say, no, you don't. The food grows you. Sorry, the food grows you. So there's that other way of thinking And when you think outside of what is defined as sacred, then you have an idea, or at least an inkling or a feeling about that there is a different energy that we cannot fully explain with our limited thought processes, and everything becomes sort of, I don't know, how do you say it, equivalent, like I said, default to what we have to explain it in this language that Jeremy and Tiokasin are speaking, so that the listeners can really understand us, because after all, it's really about now, not back then. But if you are speaking a language that doesn't even have back then or in the future, because they're including now, then which language is really the rogue, I guess you'd say, of not being able to define what sacred is? You see, maybe just accepting that there's no definition for sacred is sacred.
In the now moment, does ceremony, what is necessary for ceremony, does that come all at once? Is it all apparent, or is there a learning process?
The people, from what I see, they don't recognize what ceremony is. They want to define what ceremony is, like just what we're saying now. Is when I described myself being in the woods or someplace, even in New York City, and I'm standing there on a corner, and everybody's left and right and up and down, and cars honking and everything, and yet everything slows down for me when I see the butterfly flying above the taxis. And that butterfly is like just doing its thing, as if there were no cars there, as if there were no pollution. It's just flying. It's being the butterfly. And to me, that's what ceremony is. It's consciousness. It's consciousness of why it's here. Is to carry out the original instructions of its creation story. Wherever it originated from, that's its creation story, and it's living it out without questioning it. And to me, that's what the ceremony of life is. You're living it. You're experiencing it without. You don't ever hear butterflies complain. You don't ever hear those trees complain. You don't. It's just how it is. They just know. They're dealing with, and we often try to say, well, they're feeling pain and they're doing this, but it's always what we are doing to them that we're trying to rationalize. We should not be killing whales, or we should not be killing. We should not be eating meat. And all these things, because that's primal. That's too primitive to think like that. And animals suffer, but see, that's where we stand in the shadows of dismissal as Native people, because no one's understanding the cultures that has honored death, has honored living with death as one and the same personal grieving and living, because it's not in the mind. It's with the intuitive intelligence that butterfly has by continuing the ceremony. Whereas when we get away from the ceremony, when I'm speaking in English, I'm having to separate myself. I'm having to go into the conceptual mind and come from that perspective, isolated and coming up for reasons why I need to know. But when I'm coming from the Lakota place of being, there is no separation. I feel totally like my body is in the soul. And that's the ceremony, because then you're in the soul, your body's in the soul. You see, everything is medicine. Everything is at ceremony. And that's very difficult for me as a Lakota to live in the society that doesn't see it that way about how I feel as a Lakota.
Do you see a reason for this society to exist? I mean, I know in the Lakota way you wouldn't be able to say this is bad or this is good, but what would you be able to figure out, okay, there is a reason that this dominating bunch of people took over the world and created this hellscape, and is essentially killing the place. Is there a reason, or is it simply, a reason in a positive way, or is it simply, we're little brother, we're in our terrible twos, we never grew up, something along those lines?
Well, the exclusionary thing is not possible in the Lakota way. So what we would say is that if a people, any people that has now been violated with the virus of possession and ownership, would give that up, they would see entirely another way to live. So possession, ownership, anything like property, anything like that gets in the way of empathy. And that's, we think that ownership and possession is going to satisfy us because it's tactile. We can feel it, we can hold on to it, whatever. But when you really think and are feeling that, there is no empathy, because that gets in the way of your feeling the tree, because you own the tree. You own the land. You own the idea. You own, it's always a possession, and that gets in the way. There's no clarity with that thought in front of you. But when that is removed, especially when there's more people not thinking in the context of ownership, that clarity comes easier, that you can start feeling what you see, or seeing what you feel, what the empathy really is. Because we can clamor on about, I feel too, I have empathy too, but that often has to do with how good you treat another human being, because that's what we're stuck in. We're dismissing the rest of life and those peoples who are trying to live an old way, which is really the new way, that the new way is trying to live like without the pollution, without trying to continue on to where those old ways of indigenous peoples have been. That's why I think that consciousness is the new way, rather than being stuck in the conscience of ownership. And just even having to own who God is, defining what God is, anything like that. That is, I think, gets in the way of really understanding what empathy is.
So maybe you've even asked people this when you've talked to them about their religious convictions or something along those lines. When people, and I'll just use religion, as of a religion, talk to you about the sacred or the feeling that they get from it, and that they're being honest, that they honestly do have a feeling about it, what do you think that feeling is? If it's not what you're talking about, what do you think they're mistaking that feeling for?
One word that I know why they use it, and because they don't want to think, is the word believing, or a belief system. Belief doesn't allow one to think. And if you're not thinking, then you're not really experiencing, you're just accepting. You're obeying what whoever's demanding that your obeisance is to this God or to that belief system. And when I'm in relation to, and when I'm talking about, how would I say this? If I'm saying things that are not complementary to that belief system, then I am in opposition. I am a hypocrite. I am all these things, because I can't live like a Lakota, so therefore I'm a hypocrite. I am guilty of it, and so why are you trying to live like a Lakota? Why not just give it up and, fit it in our box, because our box is much bigger, because you can't go back to the reservation. So, we own the land, so therefore you have to think like us. And all the time I know that that's not the way it's going to end up. My ancestors are not in a graveyard. We could say physically they are, but they're not in that graveyard of our minds. We're not owning a graveyard, because our ancestors are all still alive, and we're not extending it into or moving it into the belief system that they are ghosts, that they are, evil, and because they're dead, we don't have to deal with them anymore. And I think that's part of why we're always clouded. Our judgment is clouded when we can't understand how those ancestors return to us within the life support system called Earth. It makes sense to us, but I will never be able to explain anything in English unless I just give up Lakota, give up being trying to be who I am as an original being, rather than trying to be the American, the citizen, the modern, educated, and analytical, doubting, whatever that is, alien who wants to go someplace else rather than here. So I think there's a big difference in how far even a native can stretch their mind, because if they grew up in modern society and with those same thoughts, yeah, they'll just go along with it, and they have learned without even understanding that they are actually dismissing themselves because they have all the education of the West. Therefore, you have to go get the resources of the West so that you can make life better for your people. In the sense that, those Indians out there in Brazil, they're great fires going on, and geez, if they just didn't fight us, then they'd be okay. They could have new cars, new everything like that, and have education. They wouldn't have to have their life span wouldn't be so short and all that. But it's been proven now that because of the incursions of the West, that their lifespan has now become shorter because of the fear that's been introduced, and they are working with the fragility, working out of that fragility, that there's nothing going to be left for them anymore. So, they would rather die than just give in to the monstrosity that's called domination and the Western man with their religion and science and government coming in and being spiritual carpetbaggers amongst those native peoples who don't have land to go back to anymore to draw sustenance from. We're going to throw all these missionaries at them now and say, well, see, now you're with us. Because what it is actually is trying to remove us from our consciousness with the earth to put us into the conscience of guilt, sin, and blame, and to deal with what civilization isn't to the earth. They want us to be one of the dominant species of the earth so that there's nothing left, so that we can explain ourselves in the shiny way to get off of this earth, that there's other worlds possible, because this one is not anymore. Just something like that.
Maybe that's the place to leave it. Although I am tempted to ask you one more question, as always.
Yeah.
Which is, when we talk about all beings living in their ceremony or living in their story, do you think that there is a larger story of quote unquote humanity for the earth? Does this which we're playing out, I guess it's the same question I had before in a way. It's like, was this a misstep? Did the record scratch and we went wrong somewhere? Or is this part of a larger story that, somehow circles back around to us getting healthy again with ourselves and becoming whole? Or no? Of course, that's not a fair thing for you, because if you never left that, if you never had that problem, then this story isn't for you, except you're in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in it. And, someone, try to make me feel guilty about, oh, you drive a car too. You're polluting us. You're polluting the earth too. It's like, oh yeah. So, I'm not going to recognize who forced me to live this way. And they said, well, you forced. You step out of this. You can go back to the woods if you want to. I said, okay, if I do that, then I'll just have to await the final conclusion that you're going to take away the land that I'm living in anyways. And that's what reservations are about, because that's what's happening. they're trying to incursion into our reservations now, still trying to get some stuff from us because we have valuable land underneath it that they didn't want in the first place. So this doesn't stop. It doesn't really. It's about, okay, I'm in this world now, and my job is to be who I am, which is the opposite. And every time I mention that I am who I am, it becomes opposite anyway, because they don't want me to be who I am as a Lakota. They want me to be what? An activist. They want me to be an intellectual. They want me to be all these other things that they want me to be. So when I'm not saying the things that they want me to say, I'm diminished. I'm put out. And we'll go with this this native man or this native person who's saying the things that we want them to hear. So it's all about this control, and then that one man who doesn't say the things that we are supposed to say is ostracized. They are put into the angry mode. They're put someplace that's not workable anymore. So when it comes back to myself looking at the whole of humanity in this way, again, it's that anthropological theology and philosophy that gets into the mix of things. And I really do want the humans, now this is a desire, I want humans to understand that, again, I'll repeat it, that we can't be doing the best, because if this is all there is, that the best the West can come up with, then wow. Is that it? Is that the best you can come up with? Well, I'd rather choose to be who I am than to deal with being the best, because who I am is always done, and always experienced, and always come from what's required to do for all nature to live within and be, rather than trying to extract and become something better than that source of life I am. And so when I think about the wholeness of those humans, majority of humans, I'd say, from my experience in the United States as it is, well, it's the United States. That's an entity far away from the Lakota nation. That's the United States. The United States divided us up. We didn't divide the United States up. We included them. And so in our inclusionary thoughts is that we want these people who are making the mistakes and doing other things, trying to redefine who we are as Native people. We want them to really come into their own being, because the root of where Americans think began in Europe. Americans are suffering the symptoms because of the lack of rootedness. So when the root of Americans began, that thinking process began over there before the Inquisition and all those other things that happened over there before they came. They brought 300 generations of that terror over here. So now we're in a place that the crossroads need to be crossed. And a lot of people, their consciousness are now on Earth. But now let's include, if that's possible, where the consciousness of the Earth has never left, is deep down those Native peoples who I can't even mention. Because I can say that I am, but the way I'm living is not proof in the pudding, because I have to live like an American in order to get the word across of what they're telling me to say. And right. Those elders now, unfortunately, are starting to die. And so that means, okay, I've listened, and now it's my turn to step up, and I'm going to be speaking, if not already, as an elder in the face of my own people who DNA says that they're Native, but their minds are not, you see, because they're still saying the things that they're expected to say in this society. So yes, include the mistakes of our younger brother and younger sister so that we don't make them again.